All right, then we're ready to roll.
Cool.
Um, do you want me to just jump in?
Yeah, I'm in your hands, kind of, I
Cool.
guess.
That's exciting. Okay, so you are somewhat familiar with human design, but the first thing that anyone will know if they like have a loose understanding of human design is their personality type. And you're a generator, which I think you mentioned you knew a little bit about. Generators are part of what's called the sacral beings in our world. And what that means is, on a high level, we won't go into the chart big time, but can you see my cursor?
Yep.
Okay, so this square in the middle, that's the sacral center, and anyone who's a generator has that defined. And when I say defined, I mean that is a center that comes from within rather than from outside external supports. So that internal drive in the sacral center is a lot of energy and desire and room to build. So generators are part of the builders of the world. And so it's really, really important that generators feel satisfied at the end of each day. And what you'll notice, probably have noticed about yourself, but what is one of those keys to sort of feeling your best life as a generator is that you deplete your energy resources during the day. And then when you rest, you recharge and you wake up with more energy resources. But that depletion has to happen with satisfaction attached to it. If it happens with frustration attached to it, you're on the wrong path. And those are really critical feelings for you to notice is satisfaction versus frustration. Everyone has all, I mean, I'm a therapist talking, right? Like the whole gamut of emotions exist for all of us, but each personality type has sort of red flag emotion and then green flag emotion, which for you, satisfaction means you're on the right track with alignment. And frustration is probably something that you shouldn't just say, I'm frustrated, let me go ahead and regulate. Instead, it's important to say, I'm frustrated. That's a sign that something is off track and I need to make changes and listen to that. It's it's important that generators are a little bit selfish about that, and not feeling like, oh, I shouldn't be frustrated or this is just something that has to happen. It's super important that generators are depleting your energy in that very aligned way. So, do you resonate with the satisfaction versus frustration duality? Has that come into your life before?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Um, hmm Every day.
So, with every day, yes. So that's just sort of like a high level overview when you're a generator. You're always going to be building, and generators are often really, really good at the long arc of a build. So, versus some other designs might build and then spark somewhere else and spark somewhere else. Generators, to me, my experience, have a lot of longevity and can really dig in and create a long-term project, which is personally why I love working with generators. I think you all are magic in this world because you have this ability that as long as you're feeling satisfied to just really, really keep creating in a thoughtful way. Everybody has if you pick one thing from human design to know, I actually don't think it should be the personality type. That's important and it's useful, but strategy and authority to me are some of the most useful pieces in human design. And your strategy is always how something comes into your world. So um, something might seem great, but if it doesn't come into sort of your orbit, your ability to see it in a way that's in alignment with your strategy, it's it's an easy no. Even if it's a cool thing, it has to come through your strategy. Your authority is then how you decide when there's multiple things that come into your world in alignment with your strategy. Not all of them are for you, even if they present themselves in a really aligned way. Like you're like, oh man, this came perfectly with my strategy. It must be for me. No, it still has to pass through your authority to decide if it's yours. And your strategy is to respond, which means that something isn't going to like jump into your mind when you're like meditating in a dark room, you're going to respond to something outside of yourself, and that might not be another person. It might be a piece of beauty. It might be, something you observe, something you hear randomly, but you're going to be lit up by something that kind of comes into your worldview. And that strategy of responsiveness means it's really important that you're exposing yourself to the world. And that's something that I find really exciting for generators, is that if you're feeling stuck, like you don't know the direction, you actually get to go and just be in the world and see what you respond to. Your response, because you are also a sacral being, which I'll get to in a moment, is always going to feel like your body is lit up, like you're just going to feel energized. And if you don't feel energy, even if something comes into your world and it's like coming to you and you're like, oh, that's in alignment, I can respond to it. If you don't feel that energetic response, not for you. And not everybody's like this. Sometimes it's easy to think like, well, that seems obvious, but for a generator, it's very specific. For instance, that's not how things come into my world in an aligned way. Does the response piece make sense to you?
It does when I think about certain contexts, but when I think about like growth, um, I have to expose myself to people in order to grow
Yeah, I think of
externally. But I have a whole inner world that I explore and I
mhm.
gather a whole lot from there. So it's like a balance of sorts. But
It doesn't mean that you don't have an inner world. It simply means that stimuli sparks what comes forward for you. So your inner world is very much available, but maybe the thing that is going to be brought forward today will
yeah,
be sparked because of the sunset, right? Like there's
yeah,
something that
yeah. So
is,
like
you're very in relationship with the world.
yeah, that's very much actually how I've been flowing lately, where I know that in order for something to come out of me, I have to expose myself to someone who would be willing to like receive it or request of it or something. I can't do it in isolation. Um,
I
and
think of
then
it like generators, like the job fair. It's like all the world is out there and you get to just go walk around and decide
yeah,
what you feel good about.
I like that.
Were you going to say something else? You
No, that was it.
Okay. So now let's say you're at the job fair and you're responding to everything. The fair might just be life. You're out, you're responding. How do you decide if it's yours? Because a lot comes into your world for you to respond to, especially if you're, someone like yourself who is engaging with a lot of people and really um, in relationship to the world in a very overt way. There's going to be a lot more responding than you could possibly handle in your system.
Mhm.
So there's this authority that has to come forward of how you decide which of the things that come into your world are for you. And you have a sacral authority, which I think is just such a beautiful authority because it's full of energy and desire. There's a lot of life to it. So you'll usually feel like, when I talk to sacral beings, they all have different manifestations in their body. Like you're not going to be the same as another sacral being in where you feel it. But the commonality of what's reported to me is you'll feel this like push of energy somewhere that's a yes, or a lack of energy that's a no. And sometimes people describe that the positive is like a, lit up or goosebumps or energetic or whatever. Sometimes people describe the nose more clearly as like, ooh, I get a stomach ache. It's a very visceral connection to your body. And what I think is beautiful about this is that because you're responding and then having the sacral authority, there's this beautiful relationship between you and the world that feels very connected and reciprocal. Do you have like a do you have a response that is a yes? Like, has that come into your world before?
I mean, right now, right? It's like uh, lately I've been more in tune with my emotional alignment, which is what I think this speaks to. and in tune with the fact that I have a, a natural reciprocal engine that actually multiplies things and or desires or seeks to multiply things. So lately, the way I've been orienting my energy is literally um, like a multiplier. You know, like
Mm.
something will come to me and I will multiply it. Like that, I have no other desire but to like take your desire and actualize it through a channel of my own.
Which is the most beautiful responsiveness that you have. Like you've created this entire concept leaning into your strategy without even necessarily doing that consciously, which is what I find really lovely about human design, because it's not usually that I say something that's so foreign to someone. It
Hmm.
just provides sort of a construct to think about it so that when you don't know the answer, you can refer back. In this case, we're talking strategy and authority,
Hmm.
and have a very clear roadmap for how to make the decision. And I love that you're making the decisions based on like what your body responds to. I think that's going to be very productive for you in the long run.
Yeah, because there was a period of time where I was disconnected
Mm.
from my inner authority
Mhm.
and I was denied my strategy and therefore couldn't operate at my fullest potential.
Was it was it conditioning, or what derailed
Conditioning, environmental,
you?
um, movement, like in my journey, I moved through many different environments in through short periods of time. So it meant that I was always readjusting to the environment,
Mhm.
recalibrating, you could say. I was always recalibrating myself to my surroundings from my sacral core because um, it's where I speak from. So in order to like do that quickly, I would have to sometimes cut off that
Yeah.
in order to like quickly adjust to wherever the surrounding was. And it was only in certain times where I could like tap back in. Now I'm fully in, so it's really exciting.
Mm.
But for a period, for a long enough period of time, I wasn't. So now I'm feeling that contrast where I can perceive a before and after of like, okay, what is it like when these things are not activated or not functioning at their fullest potential? And then what is it like when they are? So I think that's probably why I can like validate or verify some, you know, some of these ideas, concepts,
You know,
systems.
I started really like nuts and bolts because I always want people to leave with like strategy and authority. But if you take a high level look at your chart, and you don't have to understand all of those different centers yet, but what's interesting about what you just said is you actually have a defined G center, which is your identity center, which means that no matter what environment, if you're aligned, you are you. There are people with a undefined or open G center where their gift is to shape shift and to really like respond to the environment that's pouring into them. But you're not one of those people. You definitely have a very solid inner core. And so the idea that you just described drifting and
Hmm.
sort of being different depending on where you were, I would imagine that that didn't feel good because it meant that you weren't grounding in something that is very inherent to you.
Hmm.
Whereas when you start to ground in your G center, in your identity center, regardless of what's around you, you'll start to feel much stronger. And from a high level, you also have very undefined open idea center. So the bottom, at the very top of what looks like a head on the chart,
Hmm.
there's a downward facing triangle. That triangle is called the ajna, and it's ideas. And if you notice on your chart, it's the only shape that doesn't have any little color coming off of it. It's the colors on this chart are black and
Hmm.
brown. Those are gates and channels, and we won't go deep into that. There's so much depth to see, but from a high level concept, you see how there's none that come off of that. So none of the numbers have any color. They're not
Hmm.
highlighted. And so your idea center, your ajna, is so open that you're probably really, really receptive to ideas and concepts, which is a beautiful thing because it means that you can draw inspiration from so much. But if you're not then grounding in your defined centers, the ones that are brown, you can get very confused as to what ideas are for you, are meant to be yours, versus what ideas are just passing through you. And what you're talking about is feeling much more solid in your ability to decide when you're grounded in your inherent identity versus when you're trying to ground in this very open ajna center where there's just ideas falling in all the time, which is fun and it makes you brilliant, but it can be disorienting because so much will come in, you don't know what's yours.
Yeah, I traveled through these things.
Yeah, this resonates because we just
Yeah,
met each other, so it's fun to see if it resonates.
yeah. So I traveled through these things, and like, um, there's like a lot of conscious shifts. I made a lot of conscious shifts along the way, and one of those conscious shifts, maybe like 6 years ago, was in this identity center. Like, my name is, if you knew me 3 years ago, or no, hold on, let me do the math right. If you knew me 5 years ago, you'd call me Ross, or you might call me Ross Omari. If you knew me 8 years ago, 9 years ago, you'd call me Omari O'Neill. If you knew
Hmm.
me before that, you might call me Oh So Spectacular. So there's always like
Yeah.
a different call, a different identity that I was going by in order to arrive at where I'm at now. And so I even tracked it out where it's like every 4 years for the past 20 or 16, there was a different identity that I had assumed and that people would address me by. And so the one before this, Ross, was an attempt to rebuild that identity, from like a really grounded and a strong place that went through time and was just like rooted through it was because the open idea thing for me when I was coming of age, it was like I can't be restrained to one idea. Like you can't limit me to thinking just one thing because I know that there's so much more. And then when you expose me to so much more, if all of these mores are telling me that they're one thing as well, then I can't prescribe to that either. I need I need the full totality of ideas to really be grounded. So like,
Yeah.
um traveling through as many different, I like that's how I learn. Like I have to travel through all of the possible ideas within the domain through time, past, present, and then I get to future, um to feel like I know what I'm talking about, or I know,
Yeah.
like I have a knowing. Without that, I don't know anything. I'm just like anybody else like that. But so yeah, I relate to what you just shared is, um, having to like consciously move myself in the direction to be myself.
Yeah, so you're something called a single definition, which again, on a high level, it means that all those brown centers on the chart are all connected somehow, some way. And that means that you will have when you're aligned, you'll have an inner feeling of being very complete on your own if you are grounding in those definitions. And your, just from a high level, your definitions are the root center, which is very grounding. You'll have pulses of energy and then moments of retreat and quiet. You'll kind of feel that rhythm to your life. The sacral center that we've talked about, which is very desire and energetic, lots of momentum, very lit up. That's your authority, which means that's the one that comes first in any decision making process. You have a defined spleen, which is all intuition survival, which means that you probably have a sense of when something is truly scary for you or truly unsafe. That will kind of be an inner knowing that, first you're lit up to determine if it's for you, but then it passes through your splenic center to say, like, is this safe? How do I make decisions based on survival? And then you have your identity center, the G center that we've discussed, and all of those are working together But the flip side is you do have, your emotional center, which in human design it's called the solar plexus. That's undefined, which means that other people's emotions can be very impactful for you. You'll take them in and you might magnify them and lose track of which are yours and which are theirs. And that's where, remembering like, oh, I can lean into these steadier centers for me when I feel like I'm wrapped up in someone else's experience. You also have an undefined ego, which in human design is also called the heart, which I like because ego has such like negative connotations in our language, but it's actually just about, your desire to change and be successful in the world. And so I love heart. And yours is undefined, which can also mean that sometimes it's hard if you're not grounded in your definitions. It can be hard to know, like literally when enough is enough, or that you are enough. And so people who have the undefined ego will sometimes have this feeling that they're not enough. And that might manifest in like, maybe I ate too many chocolates to try to like fill that, or it might also manifest in sort of like I'm trying way too hard to prove oneself when really you are already enough and your single definitions are important and they're enough all as they want, all on their own. But that undefined ego can be tricky sometimes.
Mm. Yeah, I talk to myself. So in a recent conversation, one of the things we discussed was, um, you got it. Yeah, there's, you always, you got it. You're
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah. You also have a very, not totally open, but very undefined throat. And that really means that you tell the stories other people need to hear. And sometimes that's your stories, sometimes it's their stories, but you're not necessarily here to speak for yourself. You're here to speak for others. And I think your life path, whether it's offering people a way to tell their stories through Squarespace, or it's in the coaching and mentorship you do, I think it's very aligned with other people's stories passing through you rather than you gripping very hard to yours.
Yeah. Well, I reached a point where I realized, because I spent a lot of time with my story as I was going through it, because intuitively, it's just how I process. Like I knew that as a documentarian, that all of the
Yeah.
value would be in the process as opposed to like the outcome.
Yeah.
Um, and as I reached the outcome, I felt like, finally, like now I can like take on the world of story. Like I'm no longer constrained to myself because I had to like get myself out the way. And so my own story just served as like a map for me, an emotional map or guide for myself to better understand other people's emotional journeys, and the universal aspect of my own story allows me to understand other people's stories, which is where I find, like you said, like a fulfillment now, especially like in marketing. It's like, um, I think about it entirely through story lenses, where I'm a point on someone else's storyline, and but I'm very intentional about what happens when I show up in your story. when when you're on your journey, and if Omari shows up, he's bringing you some gems of some sort. He's opening up the ephod, and you're walking away with like something that is gonna benefit you on the rest of your thing. So, I mean, it's always been like that, but now it's like amplified.
Yeah, well, probably because if I had to venture a guess, you're much more aligned with your defined centers and your strategy and authority. So when you're there in those brown centers, you're able to channel what other people need to hear. And it may be they need to hear your story. This isn't about like if it's about you or not. This
Yeah.
is more you're speaking for them and you're really here for others. We tore through a half hour, so but I want to tell you one more thing about your chart, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Uh, So your profile, what it says down here, 2-4, usually the first number they both represent sort of qualities. And the first number is usually the one that people very easily identify with. The second number is more in the unconscious. And so sometimes we've ended up there and we resonate, and other times it's not as resonant. Your the first number, the more conscious part, is a 2, and you're very much in need of this like quiet hermit time where you're feeling like the ability to rest and to retreat and connect with yourself. That's really, really powerful and can at times be overlooked for someone with a 2-4, because the more unconscious part of you, the 4, is very much a networker. You're the person that like always knows the person that will help someone. Like, oh man, do you know someone that does X? And you're like, yeah, I know a guy. Like that sort of networking is in the background. And so there's always in someone's profile a little bit of opposition. And for you, some of that balance will be needing that alone time, needing that rejuvenation for your soul and for your body, but then also being very gifted at connection and being very gifted with your network and supporting others. And so finding that balance where you get that time to be alone and rejuvenating while still having a great avenue for networking is very important to your satisfaction.
Yep, for sure.
You're like, yeah, I'll do that for sure. So you resonated with both of them.
Yeah, like if I'm at a conference
Mhm.
and I'm speaking, like I love to speak be on the stage, but shortly thereafter I need to be by myself and just chill for a sec. Um
Mm.
so and that's just in one particular context, but just in life in general, I'm a solitary person.
Yeah.
But in order for me to thrive, I have to be engaged in my subconscious work.
Yes. Well, it makes sense too if you're in those big environments, like you're in a speaking engagement, especially in person and not on the computer. But I would say for me, also on a computer, you tap in to other people's emotional experience and their ideas, the way that you're so undefined in those areas. And so let's say you're speaking to 100 people, and there's a lot of emotional context that is like coming off of them, whether they're speaking it or not. And so that second line for you, and just that undefined solar plexus, that's the emotional center. It's that white triangle that faces left.
Mhm.
Um, that requires you to sort of leave and like whew, drain it out. Otherwise, you end up magnifying other people's emotions, and you're feeling things and you're like, why am I'm like so escalated or so X, Y, or Z, and this isn't mine. So that is so wise that you're like, if you're in a big space with a lot of other beings, I mean, for me, it doesn't even have to be humans. It's just like other things that are vibing emotions off of them. I
Mhm.
have to make sure that I go and find my baseline again. And it sounds like you already have that skill, which is really great.
Yeah, had to learn it.
Yeah, you probably learned it by being totally dysregulated and being like, why do I feel like this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I think that's a good opening overview. Do you have anything that came up that you wanna ask or think about through this lens?
Yeah, so I'm curious like where how this connects to business
Mhm.
or, the entrepreneurial plane.
Mm, that's really
Um,
good.
that's what I'm most curious about.
Mhm. Well, the first and most obvious place is always about what opportunities you do and do not take. So the first line is, are you pursuing an opportunity that has sort of passed the strategy and authority test? So did it come into your life by you responding to something, whatever it is?
Mm.
And do you feel lit up and energized when you're doing it? Also, remembering that as a generator,
Yeah.
you are supposed to be building something. So if you feel like you're in a stagnant place where all you're doing, say, is like seeing or informing or that sort of thing, you will probably lose energy pretty quickly
Hmm.
versus if you feel like you're creating and
Mm-hmm.
you're assembling and you're building, that sort of like really rich engagement will help. And so someone who is a generator who is self-employed, it's really, really important that you are creating a business that allows you to build on top of it rather than just like have an idea and maybe some other people build it or whatever. Like you have to be in the thick of it to feel satisfied. And when you start to feel, which we all feel as entrepreneurs, there will be times where you're like, I don't know what my next step is. Your guidepost is always to actually expose yourself, even if it's just listening to podcasts or music, or you go to an event. It's always to expose yourself to stimuli. And I think generator entrepreneurs sometimes get stuck and feel frustrated when they take the lesson of like, oh, the entrepreneur is supposed to be like isolated and just have these like spontaneous ideas and out of nowhere, like that's just not useful for you because you're so deeply in relationship with the world. And so making sure that your business allows for that spark to happen is really, really important. I would also, as a 2-4, be leaning heavily on your ability to kind of connect people and create networks. That feels like it would be very powerful for your entrepreneurship.
Yeah, it is. And that's
Yeah.
exactly what it is. All right. So immediately, my concern is um, what have I been projecting? Because I feel like that is how I operate and see as like an efficient path. But I don't want to advise anyone of that if that is not true to their design. So can you
Mm,
give me like a counter or your
yeah.
experience, like something, give me, because what I'm now going to have to do is I'm not going to have to learn everything.
Well, you've got a little bit of a cheat sheet because my chart has everybody's strategy and authority cheat sheet
Yeah.
on it.
Okay.
So you could just go to my website and you can do this for everybody. And that's why it's because they're all so different.
Hmm.
Okay, so I'll use myself as a very big counterpart to you. We're not operating on sort of the same wavelength.
Hmm.
So where you have to respond,
Yeah.
I have to be invited.
Okay.
So for me, if you were working, I'm a projector. If you were working and you were supporting a projector in their entrepreneurship,
Hmm.
they wouldn't necessarily go to the job fair and just walk around and see what lights them up. That
Hmm.
would not be aligned for them. For someone like me that has a strategy of to be invited, I need to be visible in the world
Hmm.
so that then people like yourself, for instance, can respond to
Hmm.
my vision and invite me clearly.
Hmm.
So that is so different than you don't have to wait. As soon as something sparks you and you feel that lit up energy, it's yours. You get to go for it.
Hmm.
I can feel lit up all I want. It's not mine until someone formally asks with recognition. So,
Hmm.
hey, I noticed you're really like have great ideas about this. Can you come speak on that?
Hmm.
So, it would be very hard for you to model through your story
Hmm.
what a projector should do. There's 5 types, but it would be hard to model that because we're so different.
Hmm.
But I do think that when you pull up the chart, the beauty of your design is that you're able to respond to whatever stimulus I provide. Yell at my dogs. Can you hear them? Can you hear my
No,
dogs?
I can't.
Oh,
I can't.
excellent. Good job, Apple, for the
Yeah.
noise
It's
cancellation.
working.
They're like a couple rooms away, but they're barking at each other. And I'm like, "Oof, if they
Uh,
can.
no, it's working really well. Um, cool. Okay. Because I mean, when I spoke to you the first time, I heard you say you're a projector and projectors need to be invited. So I waited for a stimuli that would then allow me to invite you because I was like, well, she needs an invitation, so I'll give her one.
Yeah.
um, and I know that all I ever need is if there's something that lights me up enough to like, you know, create a reciprocal kind of exchange. uh, I know exactly when, which I guess speaks to that choral, that sacral. I was about to say choral. I
Yeah.
gotta look that up.
Yeah.
That sacral authority.
Respond.
Yeah.
You know, there's like in human design, there's often kind of common ratios of how people build communities.
Mm-hmm.
And the projector generator relationship is really, really sacred because we need each other. And there are, for those watching, there are other designs, but since that's who's sitting in this room, that's what we're speaking about. But
Mm-hmm.
every projector might have vision, but we do not have that, what I said was the sacral center, that energy center. We don't have that. And so unless we're tapped in to someone like yourself, there's only vision. And so usually very organically, you'll find one projector with like two or three generators working together on projects.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that lovely because it just shows that even if we're all working on our same project or our own projects in some way,
Yeah.
there's this collective energy that we can all tap into. And so, for us, I'll get so much energy by kind of tapping into your design that can be very helpful for me.
Mm-hmm.
And you might get more vision so that you can respond to something new and it might
Yeah.
inspire your movement. And so having that work together, I would say when it comes to business, one of my businesses is a fairly large team. And so it's not just me. And I actually have it set up very intentionally between non-sacral beings and sacral beings. So if you think of me, like I don't really like the hierarchy vision, but it kind of helps play it out. Like if you
Mm-hmm.
think of me, I'm the owner, I'm the CEO. I always have at least two or three sacral beings right next to me, super close, so
Mm-hmm.
that when I have ideas, they're sparked and they go and get it done. But I also have to respect that if I have an idea that one of them doesn't spark with,
Mm-hmm.
it's not for me to say do it anyway, right? Like this, oh, that's stupid AI. It's a very it is non-hierarchical in that even though I am the boss, if they do not spark to my idea, I have to be receptive. Doesn't mean that my idea isn't good. Doesn't mean that my idea won't live in this world. It just means that that person is
Mm-hmm.
not the person to bring it to life and to be very okay with that. Now,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that generator just needs more information. And once they get more information, they're stoked. But like really honoring that if they're like, I actually feel kind of blah when I think about going to this event and being like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, you're not the one to go. And so in my team, I have a projector, then two or three generators, and then I have another projector doing management and a few more generators. And I have it very much built sort of like a family tree
Mm-hmm.
so that we can all work on each other's strengths. Because typically, generators share with me that they feel so excited and lit up when I get into a sort of visionary share mood. And I feel very energized when I'm in, say, a meeting with them, because otherwise I don't have my own energy source. So bringing it back to business, even if you're a solopreneur, I would say make sure that you are, if you are a sacral being, that you're tapping into non-sacral beings for the ideas and the things to respond to. And if you are a non-sacral being, which would be the manifestors, the projectors, and the reflectors, make sure that you are tapping in to the sacral beings so that you can feel excited by their energy. And maybe even the sacral being will take your business further than you could because of your lack of internal energy. So there's a real connection that I find very exciting because I love doing things in collaboration rather than isolation, and this just lends itself so well.
That makes sense. Makes a lot of sense.
Any other questions before we wrap up?
My last question, I don't know if
Yeah,
this is outside the scope, but I'm curious about
let's go outside the scope.
the right angle cross of consciousness.
So yeah, I mean, it's not outside the scope. It's just like a whole other conversation. But
Okay.
really, those incarnation crosses will help sort of understand where you're positioned in this world, like what your purpose will be. So obviously, cross of consciousness. I think there's some self-explanatory pieces to this, but you're very much here to bring an awareness and consciousness to the world. Um, we won't do it now, but if you look at the numbers in your chart, so where it
Hmm.
says like 10 to, can you see my cursor? 10 all
Yep.
the way to 34.
Uh-huh.
That's a full channel. And that will also help you because each of those channels has meaning. And if it connects from one to another, that's extra important. And you have a couple, you have this 3254, you have 3410. And so all of that with your right angle cross of consciousness, when you get to Googling, or when we do this again and go the next level, you'll see sort of the things that stand out as themes in your life. And so bringing consciousness to this world is a big theme for you. And there's some other meaning around the right versus left angle. So if anybody looks at their chart and it says something different, that's another layer deeper. But yeah, I actually think your like inherent, like your gut has taken you to a place where you're so dedicated to raising consciousness. It feels very like at this point in your life, it's fairly natural. Does that resonate with you, like to raise consciousness in this world?
Yes, since I was a child,
Oh, really? When did you first notice?
uh, 8 years old.
Wow. So what, like you just were like, oh, I'm here to I'm here to share.
Um, no, but like through my mother, I felt the call, the innate call and
Mm,
purpose.
interesting.
And also in my relationship to my environment as a child, I was
Wow.
just felt like I had the consciousness of beyond mind. Like I couldn't
Yeah.
I couldn't relate to the consciousnesses that were around me as a child. Like
Are you
either,
good at recognizing patterns?
yeah, that's all
Yeah.
that yeah.
Yeah. You're like, yeah. That's definitely something that cross of consciousness, recognizing patterns and sort of like then sharing that knowledge. So like you'll be like, oh, I've noticed this makes sense. This pattern is occurring, but other people aren't noticing that pattern. And then you
Hmm.
go on and articulate that pattern in a way that others can learn from. That's sort of like one of your trajectories with that cross of consciousness.
Yeah, that's why I want to learn all of these patterns because
Yeah. Yeah.
to fill in that gap.
Mm.
Because
Yeah. There,
I don't never I never feel confident unless I know all the patterns.
and that's I think it's interesting that I think you'll probably love human design for providing that, but I bet what you discover if you start pulling everybody's chart that you work with, I bet
Hmm.
you'll be able to pull out patterns in connection to their lived experience
Hmm.
that like maybe I wouldn't pull out, right? Like there's your that's your gift. And so you might use human design to learn something new that's not even like inherent to human design. It's just you're like, oh man, I've noticed everybody with this definition has this problem, you know, and that can be so useful in tracking. And
Hmm.
like you're a big gift, and you don't have to use human design for that. Like you might notice that everybody in a certain industry or everybody at a certain point in business
Hmm.
has the same problem, and so you're there building solutions for that, which I would argue you've already kind of done with your Squarespace business because you saw like a common problem and
Yep.
then you literally solved it.
Yeah. Yeah, and the way I treated my whole experience with it is putting myself in a place to be able to respond to problems, and if
Yes.
my solution, if the creation of a solution lit me up enough, then that was a signal that this is something that would benefit others as well.
Mhm.
So the the engine that I've generated outside of myself, it does that. Um,
You've
and
built something that would keep going, which I think is it's like such a satisfying generator thing to do.
Yeah, very satisfying to know that. um, but like the pattern recognition, um, like for example, like you can take a system like the Enneagram
Mhm.
or like Myers-Briggs.
Yeah.
And my experience with all of these things have been more so um, as like pathway points, not
Mhm.
necessarily like fixed things, but
Yeah.
more dynamic in terms of like giving you range. There's ranges for everything, and you might oscillate between a certain range, or there just might be some other thing going on. But so, for example, when you know sharing this with me, again, at where I am now in my journey, it's different than the last time I perceived it, like 6 years ago, where I had more skeptic things going on in my head at that time because I was still processing a whole lot of ideas. Um, but now it's much more easier for me to be able to like understand intuitively what I'm looking at, um, and how like I've traveled through through it in different ways. Like, you know, like if you were to if
Gosh,
you were
yes.
you know if you were to do an X-ray of my human design at different points in time, I could tell you what would have been like red, or like,
More
you know,
triggered.
yeah, or what would have been wounded, or where the depletions would have been at certain points in time. Which feels really cool and powerful because it's like, wow, I can see. Um, but I'm I'm more interested in like how I'm always interested in like the source of things. So
Mm,
I'm interested in like the consciousness that arrived at this that we're looking at and that we just discussed.
yeah.
Because that's who I like to talk to.
Well,
um,
I have so many
yeah.
responses to what you just said. First of all, the Enneagram and the Myers-Briggs, they're more self-report based.
Hmm.
So they tend to fluctuate depending on where you are in life as far as what results you get.
Hmm.
The human design chart is sort of imprinted on you at birth.
Hmm.
And so it will be fixed, but how you receive it and how you experience it and what you resonate with as far as where your conditioning is, that is not fixed because conditioning is all alive in the world. So those are kind of like two different pathways.
Yeah.
You also have, so you have two channels, and remember, channels are the colored lines that actually go all the way from one center to another. So not the half lines, those are gates, but the full line. And you have two. One is the channel of transformation, and one is the channel of exploration. And so while you were saying what you just said,
Hmm.
I could hear those alive. Like you're so alive to exploration, and then you take what you find and you're transforming not just yourself but others experience, and that's what feels really lifelike in your design, and can really help understanding like, oh, am I being propelled in an aligned direction? But the way you just spoke couldn't have been more aligned
Yeah.
with exploring and transforming.
Yeah, wow, that's cool. That's really amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for this. I appreciate it.
Oh, this is
Um,
really fun. You have a beautiful design to read. It's fun to see that you have been working on all of this through other mediums, and you have
mhm.
very much come to some of these essential themes organically. And so I hope human design can now act as a way for you to like double down and be reinforced in it. Because that's what I like about it. It's very like concrete, kind of life hacking. And I mean, I'm a clinician, I'm a licensed therapist, and I think I can get further faster with people doing this than with
Yeah,
years of therapy. So like, why not do this? I don't have time for that.
yeah, I suspect that. What,
Mhm.
last question, what would
Yeah.
be the shortest path for me to gain a better understanding of human design,
Mm.
so that I could better help the people who I'm working with on their businesses?
Well, shortest path, every design that you generate on my site will have the personality type, strategy, and authority have a little blurb. And so those, it's not in detail, it's not going to give you all the channels,
Mhm.
but it's enough that you can start without having to master everything off the bat. You can just start to learn by accruing these charts that you're going to pull up organically.
Mhm.
Um, if you want to go further, obviously there's study we can do together, or I have a friend who does these longer sort of 80-page reports that are just more fleshed out and static. They're not as
Mhm.
dynamic as our conversation in that you're not going to get to ask it questions, but
Mhm.
it's a beautiful, just straight reading. So I'll make sure that I include a link to that in a follow-up with you. But those two, I think, would be the fastest for you to not have to learn everything.
Mhm.
And there's there are other resources I'll make sure to pass along to you for deeper study if you wanted to go deeper into that. But I would suggest that for your business and based on reading your design, you actually don't need to become the like expert authority on everything you teach. I think
Mm.
you will inherently explore and then know what needs to be shared for each individual. It will just pass through you. And so I think listening to that sacral like light upness is important for you in deciding what you should and don't need to become an expert in.
Yeah. And I mean, I might have made it sound extreme, but that's exactly how I feel. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
I take what I need.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like because I spent so much time with these hexagrams.
Mhm.
Um, I'm curious of how they are laid out within this context
Mm.
and in relationship to my chart, my astrological chart, because
So
yeah.
that's going to be connected to a lot of what you see on the side here,
Hmm.
the gates. There's also a primary resource. So this was channeled by one individual in the 80s.
Hmm.
And I'll make sure to include it so that you have it. But there's a primary resource that he recorded a lot of him sharing his ideas. And it's the only primary source
Yeah.
for human design. So you'll Google and you'll see all sorts of things. But
Hmm.
this is the only primary source. And you take it with a grain of salt, right? Because it's one person who channeled it and he's a manifester. So his strategy is to inform. He
Hmm.
just literally just starts telling people everything. And then it's up to the rest of us to interpret and synthesize all of that. But there are primary resources around here. And I think
Yeah.
it's always, if you're really curious, go back to the source. I think that's important.
Yeah, I need that because I was trying to find on my own and I couldn't find.
Yeah. It's kind of like it's not like a snap. It's not a Squarespace website. I'll send it to you. You'll be like, they could use a facelift, but the resources are great.
Yeah, it's funny, and this is the last little funny tidbit
Yeah.
is like sometimes I'll search things that I'm curious about and I'll find some
Mhm.
Angel Fire website from like
Uh-huh.
1997.
Totally.
Um, the last time someone felt like they should upload that to the web.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm cool with that because all the good stuff I ever find online tends to have some ugly kind of like wrapping around it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. The,
It's the
the
irony.
ugliest website.
Yeah, the irony of Squarespace web design is like it's the prettiest thing, but
We're
um,
we're all like we're so used to the aesthetic we resent having to harvest through it. But no, there's a lot of information. I would say be thoughtful about who you're gleaning information from, just because, I am not a human design expert in that is not my primary source of study. I have
mhm,
studied it to then support entrepreneurs
yeah,
versus there are people who their only intention for human design is to grasp human design. Like there's not a synthesis. So
hmm,
my synthesis does have the lens of all the intersectional identities that I bring to the table,
mm,
which I don't think is wrong. I think
hmm,
we that I think just being empowered to say, is this someone who is offering a confluence of identities that their read of this system is useful to me, not is this the law of human design? Because nobody owns human design.
right.
We're all using human design and synthesizing it through our process.
Yeah, that's why I was really curious about your work,
Mm.
to be frank. It's just because
Yeah.
of that. Like, it's
Yeah.
like I'm a synthesizer, so
Mhm.
I'm always interested in how things come together to be as
Yeah.
opposed to things just by themselves, because then there's not much value for me there. So,
Yeah, it in the when I do little intensives with people, the 3-day manifests, it's interesting how most people come to me with the idea of business,
hmm,
but a lot of the time through just reading this lens, we end up with relationships and trauma and all of these things. And so by nature, I'm using my clinical training. I'm using, like all of that is going to come into play. And I think that's a good thing, but it just means that like if you're choosing me, it's because of all of that I bring to the table. There's no entrepreneur that I'm mentoring that I don't also know about their childhood. And I
hmm,
know that there's a lot of, traditional business coaches out there that would not be open to that scope. And so I think that goes for human design as well, is just really deciding what is useful to you and then
Yeah.
finding the person that is channeling that in the way that's useful. And for instance, I also have an undefined throat, same as you. So someone's coming to me for me to sort of feel what they need to hear and synthesize through my lens of experience and give them what they need to hear. Some people, they wouldn't be able to hear it through human design. It doesn't mean
Hmm.
that I don't still have that skill. It just means that that wouldn't be accessible. So I wouldn't use that as the lead.
Hmm.
And that's different. You might find somebody, an expert out there, whether it's in human design or business, that has a very defined throat, and they're there to like give you the TED talk, right? It actually doesn't matter who you are. They have their things that they share, and that's what you come to them for. And I have some beautiful teachers who have very defined throats, and I'm coming to them to hear what they have to say, not for them to necessarily channel what I need to hear. And that's a difference that we all have to feel into.
Okay. All right. Geez, I didn't mean for this, but that so what you're saying, because now I'm really curious. So what you're saying is like someone with a fully defined throat, or the difference would be like, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, because sometimes I feel like, oh, I need to have, like I need to, like you feel these like need tos that are just not you, which is why you feel the lack of that thing because it's not you. But
Conditioning.
yeah, so it's like how do not how do I let go of those things, but you just pointed to something that was like, oh, maybe I can let go of any need to have a defined throat.
Yeah, I mean,
But I don't know what that means exactly.
I
But
can speak for what it means to me since we
yeah,
share that feature. Um, a lot of people
yep.
with, especially the people who have more defined throats or even defined ajna, the idea center, they might come to a call and they might be prepared. Like they may have like looked through a chart or studied or have a presentation that they love to give. I actually love that. I love when somebody has a skill set and I'm there to learn. I personally have had to really adjust in my life to the idea that I usually don't know what I'm going to say until I'm in relationship with the other person. And once I'm in, your face got me there. And because of that, I can trust myself. And so I can lean into the things that I do know. I know for me, my authority is splenic. It's all intuition.
Yeah.
I have a defined ego, which you do not. But I also have a defined identity. I know that I will show up and the things that need to be said will happen. And because I believe that, and it is only reinforced over and over,
Mm-hmm.
it means that I don't have to stress, say, leading up to something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if it's a big talk, yeah, I may outline it because for me, I want to organize my thoughts. That's for me. And it may not be, I'm never going to do something like word for word until I'm in relationship with whatever it is that I'm relating to. And that's specific to my design. I don't want
Mm-hmm.
anybody listening to think like that's everybody's design. But for me, when you ask, how do I like get over that? The conditioning is that a lot of people do thrive on like writing their speech or really, I know some amazing therapists, human design readers, all these different healers who prep for every session and they do an outstanding job and that feels so aligned for them.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea what to do for prep. It doesn't, nothing is there. Like if I'm prepping, I like it's, and this is, I don't even mean to say that like tongue in cheek. It's just not available to me yet. If
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about what I'm going to say, what is available to me is grounding in my authority and definitions. So I make sure that that's all aligned so I can be my best self as I channel what someone needs to hear.
Yeah.
But like, I'm not going to know until I'm there. But it has never let me down
Mm-hmm.
because I am very good at grounding in what is mine ahead of time. And so we are very conditioned. Like, I don't have your sacral response. There's a lot of conditioning in this world that says, one, I should have easy access to energy. And two, I should listen to my gut in that lit up way.
Mm-hmm.
My authority is splenic. It's all survival. I actually don't get to know why I have urges until later. Like I have to be kind of like, it kind of seems crazy, actually. Like I look very impulsive, even though it's not.
Hmm.
And so that's okay. Someone with an emotional authority, if someone listens to this and that's what comes up, they have to wait. They have to wait and process and ride the wave up and down. They don't get to know for sometimes years before they make a decision. Could be days, could be years. That's okay. All of that is okay. But when you feel that pressure to be like, oh, that person wrote their speech in advance. So the fact that I can't think of what to write means I'm going to give a bad speech is actually not true.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's that. So for me, the same exact thing,
Mhm.
and then it also leads me to think about how I engage with social media and how I engage with certain forms of marketing. For me, and I guess this connects everything else as well, but like I do better when there's a person. When there's no person, then there's nothing for me. Um, but I guess my mental hack for that is to always have a person in mind or to kind of hijack the channel where it's like, yeah, there might be many people who can see this, but I'm just talking to one person. So it's like the same as when if I'm on the stage and you make eye contact with everyone in the room, they all get that feeling of being the one person that you like had a connection with, but you had a connection with everyone. The same illusion, but yeah, so that's kind of how I've gotten
I
through it
mean,
on the internet.
I also think you would do a great job. Like if you're scrolling and you respond to something,
Mm-hmm.
write out, like share that response with the world. Like just make that visible because
Yeah.
once you're sharing from a place of responsiveness,
Mm-hmm.
it will feel like what other people want to hear because it's come to you through your strategy and through your authority. Like I saw it, I responded to it, I lit up, and now I'm sharing it. Versus like for me, if someone
Mm-hmm.
looks up their strategy and it's invitation, you might wait until someone asks you like, hey, I've heard that you're really good at this, can you share more about that? And then, oh man, I have 6 months worth of social media, right? Because somebody it sparked that. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's just about giving yourself room and then trusting that you don't have to be the person that posts on the rigid schedule, because if you're posting just to post, it probably isn't aligned with your strategy and authority unless you are a manifester and your strategy is to inform. Then that are the only people that I think can just inform. Like
Mm-hmm.
all have to engage more relationally than that unless you're a manifester.
Fascinating. Great. I am I am definitely intrigued in
Cool.
how this can help people.
Yeah. This is something that's been very supportive of me in my personal life, my
Hmm.
professional life, and then building teams. So I'm excited to have shared it with you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no doubt. So what would be the next step for someone who would be interested in like your offerings or yeah, what would that be?
Well, first of all, everybody for no cost can go on and download their chart on my site. So it's revhumandesign.com. It'll right up there a beautiful Squarespace banner that'll say download your chart. And so
Hmm.
that's no cost. Like I never want this to be something that isn't accessible. And then from there, I have 3 day, 30 day, and 3 month offerings. I also do one time human design readings. I open that up on a limited basis because those are a little bit smaller commitment, but I do have it open right now for August. So if you just want a one-time experience, I'd say most people come in on the manifest experience, which is 3 days, and you do a lot of self-reflection. Then after that self-reflection guided day, we do 90 minutes together, we go deep, and then we work together for the full day on a voice app the next day. So it's pretty intense, fast and furious. And other free stuff, just come on my Instagram, come hang out there, alex.mufson. And I also do, because I believe that this information should not always cost money. I do no cost seminars for usually it's sometimes in person, a lot of the time over the web for groups. So if someone wants to put one together for their office or their team or their friends, those are 60 to 90 minutes, and I don't charge for those because I want to make sure that people have access to this. And as you and I have discussed before, I believe that putting this stuff and contributing to the world will always come back. So please, anyone, there's a no cost 15 minutes on my website if you want to just talk about bringing this for no cost to like whatever, your office, your friend group. I want to be a part of that.
Cool. Well, I'm glad this was a very personal experience, but I'm glad that we can make it available for
I know,
others
you're so
to
brave.
participate. Thanks
You're
again.
like, girl, I'm
Yep.
vulnerable for a living. It's fine.